it was this idea that I'm not going to let school get in the way of my education, right? The idea that if you believe that education is attached to what you remember school to be, or getting your degree, or the boss telling you to go do this, it's not going to be helpful to you in terms of growing.
Bienvenidos a un episodio especial de Conversaciones DLC, un podcast de lo cotidiano y lo no tanto. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y como saben he creado este espacio para conversar con distintos líderes de pensamiento, negocios, educación y cultura en el mundo de habla hispana y compartir con todos ustedes cómo estos líderes con su experiencia y ejemplo nos muestran la forma en la que todos nosotros podemos hacer en nuestras vidas de lo cotidiano algo extraordinario. Pero grandes líderes hay no solamente en habla hispana, sino en todo el mundo, y estoy convencido de que cuando tenemos la oportunidad de convivir con extraordinarios líderes de todo el mundo y tenemos la posibilidad de crear contenidos como este en Conversaciones DLC, también tenemos la responsabilidad de compartirlo con los demás. Así que aunque este episodio no será en español, sino en inglés, los invito a disfrutar y aprender de este episodio especial de Conversaciones DLC. ¡Comenzamos! Definitivamente una de las personas que más admiro en la industria de la comunicación, marketing y transformación digital, mi invitado hoy ha desarrollado una extraordinaria carrera a lo largo de las últimas 3 décadas, durante las cuales ha producido uno de los podcasts más longevos y escuchados en todo el mundo, 6 Pixels of Separation. Un podcast que lanzó al tiempo que fundaba la que fuera una de las más importantes agencias de marketing digital en América del Norte, Twisty Match, misma que años más tarde fue adquirida por WPP para formar el network de Medium. Periodista, autor, consultor, conferenciante y un gran mentor para mí, acompáñenme a aprender del autor de los libros 6 Pixels of Separation y Ctrl Atl Delete, el extraordinario Mitch Joel. Mitch, bienvenido a Conversaciones DLC.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the time, my friend. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I caught a couple things. I think that was a nice intro, so thank you for that. And yeah, it's amazing to still be connected to you and still be friends after all these years. And I told you before we were recording, we had a chat last week just to catch up how nice it is, how fortunate I feel to be able to travel all over the world and speaking to audiences. But the best part is when I meet people like you, which doesn't happen often, and you get to stay friends. It's the best thing in the world. So I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much, my friend. I can tell you that your friendship is one that I really treasure. So, and I really appreciate you spending time with me here. I was telling in the intro that you've been, despite the distance, you've been a great mentor for me. So thank you very much for that. Mitch, you have an amazing personal story. With too much to share. So to make it justice, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? Tell us about your career so far, the path that you've walked over the years, and what has brought you to where you are today in your career and in life.
Sure. I'll try to make a long story not so long, but in the late 80s, I became a music journalist. My first job was actually interviewing Tommy Lee from Motley Crue in a strange turn of events. And my standard joke is it was all downhill after that. It's sort of like you can't start there and then keep going up. I spent a lot of time in the music journalism space, which I was very, very passionate about. And I learned very quickly that I really liked the mechanics of it as well, the actual publishing of magazines and the advertising and all the pieces that encompass what a magazine looks like. And we have to remember this is really pre-internet. And so I went on to create, 2 or 3 magazines that were in print that I was doing the advertising for, the writing, the strategy for. I had a business partner who was handling the graphic arts and design and printing and photography. And it was a very good partnership, and it was a fun ride where we learned a lot together. But at the same time, the internet was coming into fruition then. And we started putting several pages and articles on this internet. I mean, we're talking about like early days of web browser. And, that sort of set the tone for my career in terms of media, advertising, technology, which has really been the sort of pillars of what I do. From there, I worked for a very small local community newspaper that was focused where I live in Montreal on keeping young people here. For those who don't know the sort of politics of Canada, in particular Quebec, where I live, there's been a bit of a brain drain from English people because of the prominence of the French language here. And this community wanted to keep young people who spoke English or not, or French, just young people here and not leaving for places like Toronto or the United States. And so that gave me an opportunity to interview a lot of entrepreneurs, and that led me to meeting the people who had launched this search engine called mama.com, which at the time was a meta search engine. Again, this is years before Google even existed. And they brought me on. I don't even know to this day why I took that role, but I was involved in the sales of online advertising, which now it seems ubiquitous, but we didn't have any of the formats we have now. So we were doing things like early days of banner ads, early days of sponsorship. And then as the search engine developed, we really went very deep with this idea of what is now pay-per-click. But at the time, Google had just started and didn't even have a business model, and they were calling us to talk about what are you doing over here with this whole pay-per-click thing. So it was an amazing journey that led me to work in mobile content. And again, we think mobile content now, like you turn on your smartphone, but no, that was 20 plus years ago when there was no interoperability between carriers for text messaging, no mobile browser, no smartphone. It was very text-based type of content. I did a small stint in a PR agency that wasn't my best professional experience. It didn't resonate with me all that well. Started a record label after that, and at the same time started building this agency called Twist Image, which was a pure digital marketing agency. It started in 2000. I joined in about 2002. It was a couple people and two of my business partners and one or two employees. We added a fourth business partner and grew that to be one of the larger digital marketing agencies, independent ones in North America over a long period of time. And about 6 years ago, we sold that agency to WPP. And then we took a bunch of agencies that WPP had purchased through the J. Walter Thompson or JWT, or what is now Wunderman Thompson network, and launched an agency called Miram, which to this day exists and became about 3,000 people in about 30 countries. And I exited the business about 2 years ago. And really my role in Twist Image and Miram stays the same now in the sense of what I really did was I was early into blogging, early into podcasting, creating a lot of thought leadership-based content, wrote 2 books, as you said, do a lot of media appearances. And so now I've really been focused on that and investing and advising and thinking about maybe other startup-y type stuff. But I have a passion for that intersection of brands, consumers, and technology and how that all evolves. And that leads me to today, where I sit with you talking about the present and future of the world.
So speaking about the past, the present, and the future of the world, as I was preparing for this very special episode, I took a quick look at a video that we recorded back in 2008, I think, here in Mexico City. And I can't believe how bad I was, by the way. But
I'm sure I feel the same about me. Don't worry.
No, actually, you look really good, and you like very clear, and everything that you're sharing is very clear, and clearly was one of my very first times recording something. So you can tell that I was a real beginner back then. But anyway, in that video, we were discussing, all the changes that had already happened back then, which, by the way, pales at the changes that we've seen over the last 12 years. So you, as you just shared with us, you've been part of that change, and be it through your books or your podcasts or your speaking engagements, you have helped change the minds of hundreds of thousands of people. And regarding innovation, regarding marketing, digital transformation, business, etc. So which are the changes that have surprised you the most over the last few years? What are the changes that you thought that they could happen, but then it was like they amazed you?
Well, I think the change that really sort of took my breath away would be how the ability to have an idea and create that idea and share it in text, images, audio, and video for free to the world through this amazing interconnected platform that we call the internet and social channels. sort of became this weird thing where people are only seeing people that are like them, and that there's so much divisiveness, and that there's this sort of pile-on mentality that we see the ugly side of all of us. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. I just, to sort of quote the title of a book by Steven Pinker, I just sort of saw the better of our angels. I just assumed that because of this, we would all have a more global perspective, that newer voices would come in, that 1,000 flowers would blossom, and we'd have all these amazing independent creators. And while we do, I mean, a lot of them still sort of occupy what they call the FANG organizations. In the old days, we had the big three networks, in the North America at least, and now it's the FANG. It's the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Googles of the world. That surprised me. It surprises me how people have this backlash towards social media, how people use it for how it was intended, but I don't think the way in which it can and should be used. So it's amazing, the idea of like filter bubbles. It's amazing to me, this whole sort of walled garden-y type of mentality that people have and how they protect their social spaces, versus wouldn't it be interesting to have people who completely disagree with my point of views, but I have access to, and everyone has a sort of calm and nice conversation. That's the one that has surprised me the most. I just can't imagine how individualized and nationalistic people have become with this amazing technology that allows us to see and hear everyone. It makes me really, really bummed out and sad.
It's like it's kind of helping bring out the worst in people instead of sharing what's good and focusing on the positive, and because we have access to create the world that we want to live in, right? So we don't have to depend on the big corporations giving us jobs and creating work opportunities for everybody. Like, we have now the possibility through technology to kind of building the life that we want, and instead of doing that, it's like people are missing the point and just spending so much time complaining and just discussing what's not working versus how they can create some positive change, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's that and a lot of things, right? It's almost like it's everything all at once. And again, we're recording this during this COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of us have spent maybe too much time sitting in our spaces looking at our feeds, and you don't have to. I mean, I think that is the real sort of thing, is you can find, I remember people thinking, the internet is full of just pornography and online casinos and all this negative stuff. And I was like, I don't know, like, I'm on there all the time. Like, you don't have to seek it out. If you're not seeking it out, you can avoid it. Like, you can find interesting people to follow and get very diverse perspectives. But it takes work. I mean, just this week, I think it was Twitter announced that they're releasing this technology, at least in some English languages on the Android platform, that before you share a link, if you haven't read it, it's going to send you a sort of warning and say, "Are you sure you want to share this without reading it first?" And I just sort of had like a big eye roll moment, thinking like it's sad that it's come to that. Like, I would never, like, just ethically who I am, I would never even send you an email of a link to something that I haven't read, thought about, and then thought, well, Ephraim would really value this piece of content. And yet what the statement says is most people just don't care. It's like, oh, somebody said this, here's a headline, go read, you do the work. That sort of laziness around information and quote unquote publishing, because I come from traditional publishing where it was so hard to get a magazine into the hands of somebody who wanted it, I continued that ethos into all of the content that I create. And I take the publishing button very seriously. I don't want to inundate you with more content in a world where there's a lot of content. I want to make sure that whatever I'm producing or sharing is something that I really think for my audience would add value. And I again, I sort of look at the whole space and wish if everyone did that, I wonder if the space would be that much better, that have a much healthier level of curation.
Absolutely. I certainly hope so. So Mitch, you mentioned the early days of publishing, and you mentioned and you were sharing with us how you started actually as a journalist and doing print magazines, and that anecdote about how you started interviewing the musician from Motley Crue with Tommy Lee,
the drummer, yeah.
So it's amazing, and like it's something that I know that a lot of people would love to do. And but before I get into that, in particular, I want to talk about career development, because you started as a journalist on covering musicians, and then you started with your record label as well. And you have this amazing concept that I kind of took it as something that I share as well, and it's the concept of the squiggly career, right? So everybody thinks about career development as a linear kind of thing where you just grow vertically, and actually it's not like that, right? And I think that your career is an amazing example of that, no? And so can you share that concept with us?
Sure, yeah. It started off in a conversation that I had with a friend, and she was telling me, like, she's sort of a successful engineer, and she wasn't really happy in terms of just her vocation, and she was wondering if she should become more of a consultant entrepreneur, or if she should continue in the organization she's with or work in a smaller one. And I have these meetings time and time again, and we sort of went back in time, and I was like, how did you get, like, just tell me your origin story. And it was like a classic sort of story that you hear, sort of good in math, sort of good in science. And the guidance counselor in high school said, hey, you should try engineering. And then post-secondary, starts studying engineering, gets a job, off this person goes and has, very nice life. It's a life, it's the 1%. You're doing well, you can afford to go on vacations and have a mortgage and a family. And I realized, like, how many decisions did you make from inputs that you had when you were 16 that, like, still carry themselves to this moment where you're in your, like, late 30s, early 40s, questioning life. And it's like all of this is based off of this random conversation you had in high school with a guidance counselor. And then I started thinking about my career path and the career path of people who I admire. And the career path that she took was very linear. It sort of goes from the sort of bottom left quadrant to the top right quadrant. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's successful, and it can be very satiating for people. But then I started reflecting on just the people whose lives I admire. And it just didn't seem very linear. It seemed, like you said, squiggly. And that's why I called it that in the book. It just sort of like starts, and then they had a failure, and they tried this and it sort of worked, and it went back there. But then it went up to that corner, and then it came back down, and they tried this thing over here and that. And it's like, you sort of like, it's a bit of like an adventure versus I see where this is going. And the idea for Ctrl Alt Delete, it was a book that was divided into two parts. How do you reboot work, and then how do you reboot yourself so that you can go to work in an efficient way? And I felt that squiggly was a good way to think about your career. Can you think about it more as an adventure where there's going to be problems and very terrible and scary moments, but at the same time, you're hoping to get towards that happy ending, because that is what makes an interesting life. And also the fact that digital, as you very saliently stated earlier, facilitates that. I mean, it is the great equalizer for that. We're seeing it now with this whole COVID-19, not just in work from home and in remote work, but you're seeing it in more and more merchants going on to, let's say, a platform like Shopify. More and more people thinking about how they can change their business because they're either being forced to, or because they don't, they want to innovate. Now's the time when they can be creative and figure out new tricks and new ideas. So I think that all of that sort of lends itself to this idea of, like, in crisis, people have to squiggle or wiggle or zig or zag, but in that might be really interesting and new opportunities. And I think we're seeing many of those, come to fruition now.
So it's like, are we having the opportunity to be more creative, or are we being pushed to being more creative and thinking about new solutions? Because this is a conversation that I've had with many colleagues over the last 3 months. And it's like, organizations kind of were procrastinating on how and when to, accelerate their digital transformation process, right? And starting from the work from home thing. no, and then comes COVID, and from one day to the next, we are all working from home, everybody around the world, right? So that proves that at least technologically, we were somehow at some level prepared to do that shift. And what we need to do is really a change of our mindset regarding our business and the way that we can lead our teams and conduct our business, right? So I have to ask, are we really taking advantage of the opportunity, or are most companies just reacting to the desperate needs of times?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the ability as an expert in remote work, how we're doing, but I can refer you to, there's an article on Medium that I read talking about the sort of 5 levels of remote work and how we're probably at level 2 out of the 5. And in reading articles like that, Cal Newport has put out articles on this topic. So has Clive Thompson and the New York Times and the Atlantic. I think, look, being forced into a situation can have positive and negative outcomes. And I think this is just like that. Do I think it's healthy to sit in front of Zoom screens all day or video screens all day in flat 2 dimensions, staring at people? Do I think that that's effective? I think it can work. I think it can be ineffective. To me, it's more about, and by the way, do I think that people are sometimes good when they work autonomously, or sometimes people really need energy? It's a conversation. I mean, my personal thing has been that the best ideas I've had, the best work that I've created hasn't happened in solitary, in being in solitary. It's happened in groups. It's happened when I'm in an office and people are just talking and buzzing, and there's an energy and a culture and a thing that's moving. But many people don't need that. But being forced into it, I don't think makes it the solution. I think it's just a reality. I think we would prefer to not be stuck in it. I think we'd prefer to have choices. Do I need to fly to the city for that meeting? Will I attend that conference? Would I rather everybody meet at the coffee shop or at the office or at a conference room or in a park, versus we can't and we're being forced, so we're making do? That to me is the bigger thing. It's not a question of whether or not this is good or bad. It's the fact that it is limiting, and within limitations come very good creative solutions, but also within limitations come limitations of what it can be. And ultimately, when I'm thinking about it, and I spend a lot of time definitely thinking about it, I just feel like human beings are social creatures. We need this connection. And I think we see that we need this connection because we spend a lot of time on video suddenly. Like, I want to see you and I want to be able to talk to, or connecting to people that you haven't connected to in a long time. And it speaks to the socialness of how we are and how we do things. So there's that. The other big idea, and I think this is a positive, is that we're all in it now. So you have everybody from, kindergarten up who is now needs some level of technical proficiency, to the very elderly who are now doing things like, reading books from the library on their smart devices, who are doing FaceTime and that whole thing. So that's a great moment for people like you and I who've been talking about the power of this space forever, right? E-commerce was at sub 15% of all commerce. It jumped during COVID-19 to 30, 40+%. I don't think it's going to stay there. I think it's going to go back, but I don't think it'll go back to 15. It'll be higher, but I think it does set a path, or charts a course that is ultimately interesting and good. Like, I think that that's just a validation that we know, that the world is changing. So that's more where I'm sitting with this stuff, that it's sort of neither good nor bad. It's somewhat ambiguous, but it is an opportunity now.
Love that. So speaking of opportunities and making choices, because and I agree with you, it's a matter of making like the choices that we want. So let's talk about choosing whether we complain or take action. You have a very cool story about how you first started as a music journalist, and how you wanted to do something that back then at least might have been a little out of your reach, but instead of complaining or giving up, I love this story. What did you do?
Oh my God, there's so many stories, Efrain. Help me. What did I do? I don't know. When was this?
I'm talking about how you were calling like the record labels to book the interviews, and how
Oh,
did you set the
yeah.
whole thing up?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, that's also sort of a crazy journey where, like, I didn't know how to do a magazine, and so I basically went through physical magazines because, again, the internet wasn't around, and tried to find any publisher or editor who had a phone number, and I would call them and ask if they'd help this, basically teenager out because I wanted to start publishing a magazine. They probably thought I was crazy, but one or two were really helpful and spent a couple hours with me on the phone and gave me their time and a lot of great information, valuable information. And then for sure, I mean, I was a teenager trying to get all these people to let me interview them. And again, I'm not writing for a major magazine or newspaper now. I'm just sort of on my own. But the story really ultimately is true today in how I conduct myself. And lately, when people say, what do you do? I tell them I collect conversations. Which basically means I like having conversations with people because those conversations ultimately lead to better relationships that ultimately lead to building a better and more powerful network. And that's really, to me, the success. When I got a bit older and got into reading more, I was a big fan, and still am a big fan of Jeffrey Gitomer's books on sales. He has the Little Red Book of Selling, the Sales Bible, and a whole bunch of other,
Great
great,
books.
great books. Yeah. And Jeffrey would say that your network is your net worth. And I don't know if it stuck with me, but I knew that I was heading down that path and road. And it still is true to this day. And that's the answer. Yes, there's this sort of hustle culture. And when I was younger, I was definitely hustling more, but it wasn't in a salesy type of way. It was because I had a genuine interest in building good networks and meeting great people. And I'm fascinated with those stories. And so again, I think to a certain degree, that desire has a good DNA for being in the space of marketing, innovation, technology.
I love that, and I couldn't agree with you more. Like the power of having the right conversations and building that network, and just sharing and creating stuff and value with other people. I think it's the right thing to do. So from Tommy Lee to Seth Godin, from over the years, you've collaborated with some of the brightest minds in marketing communications, in digital transformation, in the music industry. Who would you say are one or two people who have really blown your mind and left like a footprint in your life, and what have you learned from them?
I mean, yeah, I think that Seth Godin would be one of them. I sort of came across his books very, very early. I met him very, very sort of momentarily at Internet World back when he was about to release his first book, Permission Marketing, which wasn't really his first book. I think it was his first big book because that took me back to one of his other books called Survival is Not Enough, that I still think is a fantastic book. And then just sort of like observing, it's like he built a company, sold it to Yahoo, went off and started speaking and writing books and working on projects. I just sort of really thought that would be a great life. Like that would be exactly, what I wanted to do. And in the strangeness of life, of meeting him and becoming friendly with him and having him sort of take my calls or emails or just be willing to spend a bit of time with me, it's I always say, like, he's this mentor who's always present in my life, and it has nothing to do with the fact that he returns my emails. Even if he didn't, he would still be a massive mentor just through the work that he puts out and his work ethic, his publishing schedules, and everything. Just there's so much. It's a massive body of inspiring work, and he's very Renaissance to me, and I've always been attracted to that. But I think when I started not just reading his content, but observing him and listening to him being interviewed in other places, I still to this day find it extremely inspiring. His humility, his giving, his warmth, his real desire to help other people get better at the work that they do. It's not only helped me do that, but it's made me want to be like that. And so I think he's an easy one for me to sort of just look at and go, it's extremely inspiring. But with that, there are just so many great thinkers who sort of do their thing. People like Denise Leon, people like Whitney Johnson, There's so many in that sort of space of thinkers who, Dory Clark would be another great example of that, Michael Bungay Stanier, Stephen Shapiro. I mean, I could go on and on with people who just put out such interesting work in the space that they're in and consistently and constantly keep adding value and doing things. So yeah, I mean, I'm inspired because I get to be around these people. I get to talk to them. I get to read their content. It feels like a very 360-degree experience for me. And, the big thing for me is that I was never really all that good in school and didn't read that much. But ultimately, I do believe that there doesn't have to be a difference between entertainment and education. Like, your entertainment can be very educational, and I don't mean that in a sort of PBS documentary kind of way. I mean that in a real way. So people would say to me, "Oh, like, don't you just want to get away from it all and like not look at your email?" I'm like, no, my email is like one of the most fascinating places and interesting places in the world to live. If you saw who I was getting emails from, you would want my email address. Like, I
bet.
like that. Like, I like that experience. So part of me is seeing people like Seth living their best life from my perspective, as an external person, not necessarily knowing the dynamics, internally or personally, and being how do I replicate? How do I follow along? How do I get just a little taste of it? It's great.
You know that out of all the leaders that I've been fortunate enough to interview in this podcast, I don't think any of them have told me that they were good students back at school. I think that everybody kind of became these, amazing leaders when they discovered what they were really interested and passionate about. And I myself, I was never a great student. I became a great student once I was in college and I was studying. And bear in mind, I changed career paths like twice when I first started college. And I became a good student when I started doing what I really like doing, and then finding, this passion for reading and learning. And I love that concept, education and entertainment. Because your education can be really entertaining. And at the end, we all become, how does it go? We all become the mix of the 5 to 10 people that we hang around the most.
Yeah, I've heard that story. Yeah, for sure. Look, I mean, there's a tweet that I always see in my Google alerts for my own name that come up. And again, I did say it. I just don't know if I made it up or I was quoting someone else and it just got sort of attached to me. But it was this idea that I'm not going to let school get in the way of my education, right? The idea that if you believe that education is attached to what you remember school to be, or getting your degree, or the boss telling you to go do this, it's not going to be helpful to you in terms of growing. And so when I have the opportunity to go on, I'll go on a daily walk if I can, and I'll listen to either a very in-depth conversation or an audiobook. Not music, not nonsense. I mean, some people need that, and so it's okay. I would just much rather watch a documentary even than YouTube videos or TikTok videos. It's just who I am by my nature. I'm very inquisitive, and I'm a bit of an infovore, right? Like, I'm constantly trying to consume information. And I think that there's something in there about just thinking about that for your own life.
Infowar. I love that. So with all the things that you've done over the years, with the fortunate endings and the less fortunate ones, if Doc Brown were to show up on your door with his DeLorean and you could go back in time, at what point in time in your life would you go back to give yourself what advice?
So strange. I just came off of another recording for a podcast, and I made a reference to Back to the Future, and I had never done that. And here we are, and you're saying that. It's like very bizarre to me. So I think I would go back to 15, 16-year-old me, and I would do two things. One is the whole Doc Brown Back to the Future scares me, because the one thing I would love to say is just stay the course, don't worry. But I'm worried that would screw up your whole time-space continuum and shift everything off, because that's what happens in Back to the Future. So I don't know if I would say that. But I tell my kids, they're very young, and I've been saying the same thing to them from day one, to the point where my youngest, who's in kindergarten, can repeat this. If I say, right before school, I'll always say to them, before I hug them and give them a kiss, I'll say, go in with a positive attitude, ask great questions, and pay attention. And I say it so much and so ad nauseum that if you said to my kids, like, what does dad say before you go to school? And they go, go in with a positive attitude, ask great questions, and pay attention. They're sort of like that. But I'm okay with that, because I think that means it's sunk in and they know that. And maybe those words are echoing somewhere in their brains. But I think I would tell myself that, go in with a positive attitude, ask great questions, not good questions, great questions. Great questions take work. They take thought. They take writing and focusing, and have a positive attitude. I think that and pay attention rather. I think that really is the secret to being open to seeing what might happen. When you're open to seeing what might happen, things happen. New ideas happen. If you are going in with a negative attitude, if you're not there to ask questions, you're afraid of how you're going to be perceived or what they're going to say, or you're asking things everybody's been asked. And then if you're not paying attention, where are the points of fragility? Where are the points that need to be reinforced? Where are the points that are very, very strong that we should keep focusing on and pushing forward? It's very hard to really expand your horizon. So I say it to them, but I'm really saying it to myself. And I'm saying it to them in hopes that if that's all they take from me, I think it's good.
Love that. Now, on the other hand, though, what is the worst advice that you've got so far in life? The one that, you just learned the hard way that you should have never listened to?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, it's been quitting or stopping or being fired even too early. And again, Seth Godin does this magnificently in a very small book with a massive idea called The Dip. But before I started the agency, I had done a lot of things, both on my own and with others. And when I started really getting involved in the agency business, I was really focused on this idea of really putting into the world the fact that I'm not going to let go, that I'm going to see this through. That when it gets really, really hard and really tough, I'm not going to try to quit, look for an exit, figure a way out. I'm going to persevere. And I wish that I had been able to tell myself that, because that was the worst thing that I did. I often let go too early. And with the agency, and I didn't let go, we had a real win personally. And that would be the thing. It's like, I just let go. I just didn't, I dropped out, whether I took advice or just my own bad self-talk. I think the other stuff could have been phenomenal too. And I just, or I had an idea and I didn't see it through. I was like, yeah, maybe another time, or when I get this or when I get that, versus going for it.
Last night I was recording another episode with an amazing woman named Paola Curi, and we were talking about all the work that she's done in the last few years in terms of gender equality, and she's done amazing stuff, and she's really young. And one of the things that she said that I loved learning from her is that the way that she describes herself is that she's a great finisher, not only a great starter, but an amazing finisher. And I love that about her, like seeing things through.
Yeah, wow, would I love to have that as a skill. Like, there's certain people who are like real mechanics, they're real sort of like dig in, hands dirty, nose in, hands in. And I wish I could say that's totally me, but I can really I'm more like a piece of cloth on a clothesline trying to get dry. I'm sort of flapping in the wind a little bit,
So talking about how we are, one of the biggest pieces of who we are is our routines and our habits. And this is something that I love discussing with our guests here in the podcast, because I hold the premise, Mitch, that for someone to be as productive as you are, you necessarily have to build a set of a certain kind of routines and habits that can help you be as productive. So what habits and routines have you established in the last few years that you keep even to this day to help you in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I wish it's just a crazy time to ask this, because what habits do any of us have? It's like, as we were recording, one of my kids just walked in. I'm like shushing them out, like our habits are definitely not the habits we have today. So a couple sources. One is I always ask this of Seth Godin because I feel like he's somewhat of an enigma and a mystery, and maybe if I can chip a little bit away at him, I'll get something to come out. And one point he just said, "Look, Mitch, ultimately what you're asking for is my secret sauce." And I was like, "Yes, I would like your secret sauce, Seth. What is that secret sauce?" And he's like, "We all have a secret sauce, and the problem is I don't necessarily know the recipe for mine." And even if I did, I don't know that I would share it. And I thought that that was a very true statement. Like often, like my secret sauce isn't something that I really know or can share in that type of way. But uh, I can talk more abstractly about
Mm-hmm.
things. So one of them is note taking. I believe very strongly in taking notes in almost every single conversation that I have. Note taking for me has been one of the greatest gifts to myself that I have, whether it's Julia Cameron's morning pages, if I can in the morning, whether it's prepping for a conversation, whether it's taking notes here on something you say that has inspired me or given me ideas. It's very hard to capture stuff. And I find note taking to be the most effective way to do it. And for me, it happens to be with a pen and multiple types of paper and pens all over the place. So one would be routinely taking notes. Two is reading. I don't think you can be a good creator of anything if you are not reading. And I don't mean reading like just tweets and articles. All those can be lovely, but I mean actual books. So the reason I'm hesitant to talk about routines is because I'll typically read 70 to 80 books a year. But since February of this year, I haven't read one book because I just can't seem to get my head into the game because of what's happening in the world. I'm sure it will come back. I'm not putting pressure on myself, but I think reading books is an incredibly powerful routine that has helped me at an exceptional level. And three would be conversations. Yes, there are conversations like this where I'm happy to be someone's guest and go back and forth, but I prefer when I am leading the dance a little bit more. And so, for example, since the whole COVID-19 happened, and I've been locked down since late February, because I actually think I might have had it, who knows, but I was pretty sick in late February. I've done over 30 interviews for my podcasts. Um, and that is a routine that forces me to read someone's book or go through it, think about what they are thinking, figure out dynamic and engaging things I want to talk about, and then have a very compelling conversation with them. Uh, Other routine things are, for me, I wish I did it daily and it was a very ritualistic, but walking long walks. I happen to live in a very beautiful part of the city that allows me to go and into a sort of small area that has a bit of a wooded area that I can walk around in. And I find going in there with a notebook and just having a podcast or an audiobook running is extremely helpful to having me have a better day. I won't lie, some coffee helps too. So those are routine like things that I do. And I say routine like because I don't know if they have to happen every day. I don't know if it has to happen at a certain time. Uh, but my brain doesn't really stop. And I mean that in a healthy way. Like I really do love thinking and I love thinking about thinking.
I as I was listening to you sharing taking notes, I was taking notes of what you're sharing.
Good. Note taking is good. I like that.
Yeah. I have so many notebooks around that I use for different things. I agree with you. It's just it's the and I think that actually, quick question: does doing your podcast has to do anything with that habit of taking notes and kind of documenting everything for you?
Yeah, totally. In fact, one of the things I've talked about, people say, like, how do you prep for your podcast? The answer is I read. I read a lot. Do I
Mm-hmm.
take a lot of notes for that? I actually don't for the podcast because I want it to be more organic. But again, I've been doing interviews for decades and I've done thousands of them. So I'm kind of used to that forum. But at the end of the podcast, when I'm done recording, if you looked at my notes for the guest, it's usually a full page without skipping lines of notes that if you look at it, it probably looks like I created questions before I spoke with them. And I do that just because, yes, I want to document it, but often I want to, if I'm doing show notes or even just like I want to reflect on something they said, capturing it when they say it is helpful without sort of like interrupting the flow or my thinking of the conversation. And often if you were here where I live in Montreal and we went down to my favorite cafe across the street from my office, I would have a notebook and a pen with me. And even if it's just like, oh, you said something, I should let you know about this, or just even for myself, I'm like, that was an interesting idea. And ideas go everywhere, right? They go into slides for presentations, they go into blog posts, they go into podcasts, into Facebook posts, into Instagram. I mean, they go everywhere. So I'm very careful with trying to because there's nothing worse than, oh man, I was talking to a friend and he said this thing about Twitter and what was it? Like I can't live with. I can't live with that.
Yeah, I identify myself with you, Mitch. I want to be very mindful of your time, and I know that I could certainly spend hours chatting with you and learning from you. Actually, I feel like I kind of do because I listen to your podcast every week. So
you are then, yeah, you're in it.
But before we move on to the final question, where can the folks listening to us follow you, connect with you?
Yeah, so if you go to 6pixels.com or mitchjoel.com, it's, Mitch Joel is more of what I would call the bibliographical site of me, and then 6pixels is more of a publishing platform where you'll see my blog, my podcast, the articles that I'm writing, some of the media I've done. You can subscribe there, and the subscription is obviously free, and what it does is just anytime I publish, it'll send you in your inbox what I published. It's very straightforward, and you can follow me on socials. I'm around, and I try to be somewhat active. I'm very easy to find, and I pride myself on being both super accessible and being the easiest person to work with. So that's my goal.
Very good. Thank you. So the whole premise of this podcast is not only to learn about your trajectory and your experience, Mitch, but also to learn how great leaders like yourself turn, the day-to-day stuff, the daily stuff in your life into something extraordinary. So how do you, Mitch, turn the daily stuff in your life into something extraordinary?
I don't know if I do, but I can tell you that not a day goes by that if one of my kids will say to me, hey, Dad, or calls me Daddy, that I don't stop and go, who are they talking to? And I'm not amazingly amazed that in the whole craziness of life that I've got these humanoids that I'm their parent. And I think that feeling that way for me comes through them, watching them experience life or showing them experiences that I loved and seeing how they react to it, whether it's negative or positive. That for me answers that question more than anything I do for myself, for sure.
Love that. Mitch, I really want to thank you for your time, for your generosity, for your friendship. I really appreciate your friendship. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us here at Conversaciones DLC. Before we say goodbye, I just want to, thank you again and acknowledge you for the amazing work that you've done in the last years, the inspiration that you brought to a lot of us. You've certainly provided or inspired me, and this podcast is an example of how much you've inspired me. So thank you again, and I really look forward to seeing you again soon in person. And in the meantime, keep sharing, keep learning, and stay happy, my friend. Thank you very much.
It's a mutual admiration society, and having the opportunity to come down and meet you in person and speak to the people at the IAB at the time, that's the stuff that it's just reciprocated. So thank you. I'm a big fan of yours too.
Thank you, my friend.
Gracias también a todos ustedes por escucharnos en este episodio especial de Conversaciones DLC. Recuerden, este es un programa semanal, así es que si no lo han hecho ya, suscríbanse al mismo y compartan este y todos los episodios de Conversaciones DLC, porque estoy seguro de que entre sus amigos, familiares y colegas habrá quienes se puedan beneficiar muchísimo de las lecciones que todos estos grandes líderes como Mitch hoy nos están compartiendo. Gracias también, como siempre, al mejor café de México, Ricolto Café, por ser parte de esta aventura de vida todos los días. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y los espero en el próximo episodio de Conversaciones DLC. Hasta la próxima.